Okay, thank you so much, Alona and Eric, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And it almost feels as if whenever I'm asked to share, there's something in particular that is going on in my life at the time. So I always keep my shares current and related to where I am in the program now, and also give an idea of where I've come from so far in this journey. And as I said, today happens to be the 25th month anniversary since I walked into my first S fellowship. And in the 1 month since that time, from that initial time, so that would have been, if you're looking at exactly 2 years ago today, so in that 30-day span, I joined 3 S fellowships. I got 2 sponsors because one, I figured that once somebody started to get to know me and to understand what I had done, then they would want to drop me. So I needed a backup person just in case.
Recording in progress.
Okay. And so I came into this fellowship with a lot of fear, and that's what I want to talk about today. How these days I am choosing trust over fear. And I'm glad to see that many of you're brand new in the program. So hopefully some of that experience can encourage you through these, if it's anything like what I experienced, through a lot of fear and overcoming that, and what it took. So I tend to be a very methodical person. I was writing things down, not because I ever thought one day that I would be a speaker or anything. I never had any hope of any recovery whatsoever. So I didn't, I figured I'd be there for a few months, maximum, maybe 3 months, and then I'd be gone. I just wanted the pain to stop, and then I'd be gone. And in terms of my acting out behaviors, it was both online and offline, and both, included things that I never thought I would do because I grew up in church. I grew up with a certain reputation, and I worked very, very hard to cultivate the reputation that I have. So for me to jeopardize it meant that I essentially had to live a double life so I could present myself one way, because that would give me the latitude to do what I want, when I want, however I wanted, and not be questioned. And I really, really hated to be questioned about anything. So there was a lot of arrogance along with it. So why did I unravel to the point that when I came to program, I was very desperate, more than 800 hours in recovery my first 150 days. 150 days, more than 800 hours. Just feeling like I was walking on, or not even walking, but just on my hands and knees on broken glass. It was very, very painful. I was at the brink of losing my marriage. My health was affected. We were very close to losing our house. I had destroyed our personal finances as well as my business finances. I was actually misusing my skills of basically how I run things in a corporate environment to actually run my secret life and getting other people to act out, and in person and online, anywhere in the world. And I always like to brag about this mental map that I had in my head of where everybody was, so that at any time of day or night, in person or not, that, there was always somebody ready to do something. So it was really crazy. I had a lot of pain, a lot of fears, and I had no idea that I had fear. I had no idea how much pain I was in until I started doing inventory. And doing the inventory, because it kind of removed me from my behavior, or it started putting distance between me and my behaviors, I began to see how disconnected I was to reality. I knew I was disconnected to reality because a lot of times I would be driving and I'd be fantasizing that there's somebody with me in the car, even if there was nobody with me in the car. I found reality to be too painful in many ways. Whether it was, rejections from not getting what I thought I deserved in the corporate environment, friendships that didn't work out, men who didn't do what I want when I wanted, including my husband. And I basically treated men as if they were there for my sexual pleasure. I didn't depend on anyone financially for anything. So that meant every time I looked at a guy, to me, that was my reward for being a good person. It was my reward for working hard. It was my reward for sacrificing. Like, whatever I could think of, it was my reward for doing that. It was basically my reward for just existing. So I definitely was a user. I definitely used people for my addictive needs. And so I was really scared that if my husband found out again that I had cheated again, and I had done much worse since the last time he found out, that he might kill me, that he might kill my family, that because I felt like a lot of the things I did were just things that he did not deserve. But I was so angry at everybody that the only thing I cared about was what was going to make me happy that day. And if it's not something that made me happy, then I didn't have time for any man who didn't do what I wanted. So it just became more of a game and inflating my ego more and more. But I was in a lot of pain, and I became forgetful. I became unable to keep my commitments. I would make promises and break them all the time. I could never sit still. I could never be in one place at one time. I was always going somewhere. I was always coming from somewhere and going to something. And that's another tactic that I use to sort of try to be functional and try to appear like I'm there, but I really wasn't there. So even if I was physically somewhere, I was there just long enough for people to notice I was there, and then I was taking off to something else. So I use a lot of things to run away from myself, run away from my pain, run away from my problems. I never felt like I had the capacity to face my fears or face difficult feelings. And whenever my sponsors would try to have me journal about my feelings, I'm like, oh, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. Like, I can't handle that. Like, I'm barely functional now. I barely got through withdrawal. I'm not able to do that. It was really not for a year into my recovery that I started facing my feelings. And it was excruciating. But like I said, I had a lot of fears because I had screwed up so many things, and I had so much shame from what I had done, and feeling guilty over men that I led astray, and things that I wrote, disseminated, produced one way or another, that I'm like, why would God do something for me? Why would God do anything for me? I fully expected that if I started sharing some of the specifics, that even people I didn't consider myself a sexaholic, really. I didn't consider myself a real sex addict. I did not consider myself any of those things. I considered myself doing something that I wanted to do, and people who were in these rooms who were saying they were addicts, they were only saying it to make themselves feel better. I didn't think it was a real problem. And that's why I thought, I'm just going to be here for a couple months, maximum 3 months, and then I'm going to be gone. I don't understand these people who have to be here all their life. Like, what's so wrong with your life that you're here, like that you've stayed here for years? So it definitely feels like God played a trick on me, because I was running away from the relationship with God that I had started building in my childhood. And then when I hit bottom, I had no idea what 12-step programs were about, except for alcohol. Because, my late father-in-law was an alcoholic, and he had been sober since since before I met my husband, and he died sober. But except for that, I really didn't know anything about 12-step programs. I didn't know they were a spiritual program. So when I landed into a room and everybody started talking about God, I'm like, I felt a little panic because that guilt I had been feeling about my behavior all of a sudden started hitting me in the face. I couldn't run from it anymore. I couldn't run from me anymore. I was being asked to talk about anything and everything that I had ever done. And I'm like, no, I don't think you can handle that. Because even one of my sponsors, when I was telling her some stuff, she's like, what does that mean? And I'm like, oh my God, now I'm going to have to explain things. And I'm like, okay, I have 5 minutes. Thank you.
10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So I thought, wow, nobody, I was bracing myself so that if people got to know me, or when people got to know me, they would reject me. And that actually happened before program. There was somebody that I was close enough to, but she wasn't so close to me that I would be afraid of any fallout if I were to tell her everything that was going on with me. But at the same time, she was far enough away that I felt it was safe enough to tell her. So she's somebody who went to a different church, lived in, a little bit further away from me. So I figured, I could sort of bare my soul. And on occasions where I would sort of hint around my problem and open up to a couple of women, I got ghosted, basically. And I'm like, yeah, you're pretty untouchable because you've done some, inconsiderate things at best. And I'm like, and I didn't have any friends. I didn't know how to make friends. I only knew how to demand things. And I only knew how to demand things because I thought that's what I deserved. And anyone who stood in the way of doing that was just a waste of my time. So I never really invested in getting to know people unless they were people that I already considered important in my life. Other than that, like, people had to basically be worthy of my time. So in recovery, and I was not even aware that it was that bad until I was doing step work in recovery, and I started discovering these things about myself. I'm like, wow, I'm a pretty horrible person. At least that's what I thought. But I was not a horrible person. I was just a person who had a lot of pain, and this happened to be my drug of choice. This happened to be my alcohol. And I didn't realize that I have the exact same problem as somebody who has a gambling addiction, as somebody who has an alcohol problem. And I thank God that I have, as it says in one of the readings in the program, monitoring and support. Because when I open myself up, it's a form of monitoring, but it's not in the sense of controlling me. It's to be able to say, Rina, we see you, we see what's going on with you, we see your pain, we see your progress, and it also is support, because this is not a program where I could heal myself. Most of my life, I tried to live in a way that I don't have to depend on anybody. I don't want to owe anything to anyone and then have them throw that in my face. Because again, it's not something I could handle for somebody to do something for me, and now I owe them. And then they can use that to humiliate me. I was always, being afraid of being humiliated. And what's worse than somebody who has a good reputation, for that person to be found out. So I was extremely afraid of being found out, of losing my marriage. And I had some people come into the fellowship hoping to save their marriage. I had no hope of saving my marriage. That was not even a goal at all, because I figured that was already gone. So I basically only had to focus on my own recovery. So fear says what? Fear is FEAR. The Big Book tells me I need to face my problem. On page 124 of the Big Book, it talks about how we grow by our willingness to face and to face our character defects and then convert them into assets, right? So I may have a fear right now, but I don't have to deal with the fear by myself. I have specific tools. I don't need to reinvent the wheel about how to face that fear. Do I need some help to face my fears? Yes. So is it better sometimes for me to simply talk about my fears with someone instead of just writing it down and then sharing it with someone? Yes. So if that's the approach that needs to be taken, then that's what I need to do. And then if I subsequently write something additional and then share it again, then I'm able to do that. So it was extremely effective for me that my one of my third, but I consider that person my first real sponsor because that's the person I worked with the most. And at the time, up until that time, is the person I worked with the most. That person did the step work with me. I did not have to go write something down. I did not have to face my inner darkness by myself. So by having somebody in real time work, thank you, 5 minutes, by having somebody help me in real time to deal with my feelings, then it kind of started to break it down and break it apart. It was not a short process. It was extremely long. However, it gave me the tools and it gave me the practice of how to do it, how to think about it, how to work through it. Because to me, it was one whole big mess. I couldn't see my way through it. I was just trying to run from it as fast as I can. And I didn't know how to deal with anything. So I really benefited from somebody step by step working through that with me. And, page 98 of the Big Book says, program is really simple. We simply trust God and clean house. That's it. Trust God, clean house. Sometimes we make it more complicated than that, but it is not. So when people say, oh, I don't have time to work program, it's so complicated, I got to do this, I got to make phone calls. No, trust God and clean house. The more I trust God, the more I can clean house. Because then I have that trust that, okay, as I'm cleaning things, as I'm making an effort, maybe God will give me a shot. Maybe something will happen. I don't know what's going to work out. I don't know what I can prevent, what calamity I can prevent, but at least I'm going to try. My first meeting that I went to, I drove 2.5 hours one way to be there. I was in no way, shape, or form capable of really getting there because with this addiction, I was pretty much acting out 24/7. I was barely getting 2 hours of sleep per night. I was running a business and doing all of this. And very often I did not feel able to drive because I literally did not have the energy. I would be afraid I'd fall asleep behind the wheel. But I was desperate enough that I had to drive. It's the only meeting that I knew of. And I prayed. I'm like, God, if you kept me alive all these years that I've been doing stupid things, you can keep me alive one more time. And if I was afraid of falling asleep behind the wheel and causing an accident or killing myself, and I'm like, but if anything happens to me, at least I'll die trying. At least I'll die trying to get help. I didn't know if I would even make it to my first meeting. As ashamed as I was to show my face in a real meeting and tell somebody I'm really screwed up, everyone, I did not know if I was going to make it to my first meeting because I was in such terrible shape. And driving in New York is not something I had ever really done. I would pay people money to drive me to New York. That's how scared I was of New York traffic. And I'm like, if I make it to my first meeting, great. But if I don't, at least I will die trying. And after that first meeting on my way home, I'm like, well, I made it here. I'm like, well, if I made it here, then maybe I can make it home. But again, I had the same attitude. At least I tried getting help. If anything happens to me now, at least I tried. And I'm very grateful for that sense of desperation that made me go to so many meetings in the beginning. So the second letter in fear, E, eliminate it. How do I eliminate it? Through step work. Sometimes we think there's something magic beyond step work that we need to be doing. It's not. And in step 12 in the 12 and 12 book, it talks about how people are afraid of inventory simply because they're not in the practice of doing inventory. I was not in the practice of facing my feelings and doing anything about it. So that's why I was so damn scared. But the more practice I have in looking at myself, in facing myself, the more I can accept and I can take action and I can say, Rina, you're doing a good job. You're trying. You're opening up to someone. You're letting somebody know what's going on with you. What's coming out of your mouth may sound stupid, but at least you're taking a chance and opening your mouth and saying it anyway. And you're letting somebody help you. So the A really can be acceptance and it can be action, because just thinking about it is not going to get me anywhere. It may be a sexaholic issue and you're like, well, what action can I take? The actions are opening your mouth and talking to somebody, being accountable, taking the next right step. I had to do and still have to do actions like putting my emotional sobriety on God and not expect my husband or men or work or anything else to be my source of validation. That takes actual work. It takes actual work. So that means in order for me, sorry?
20 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So that means in order for me to not try to meet my needs in these destructive, addictive ways, that means I need to take some action so that I fill up on the good thing, and then that decreases my need for the addiction. Because if I'm getting the reason I go to addiction is because I felt I had a need, legitimate or not, that was not getting met. So I'm like, this is the thing that gives it to me and I want more. But if I'm starting to get those needs met, then I'm not as crazy wanting that. And when I have a spike of that desire, I can say, that's not really me. That's the disease trying to trick me back into that. So really the R, I would say, is rebuilding trust with God. I have what I call a step 2 inventory, where I make a list of what I currently believe or need to believe about God, about myself, and about other people in order to recover. And that's based on page 27 of the big book. Sorry, my cat is walking on one of his toys. And that means, what do I currently believe about God? How do I currently trust God? Where do I not currently trust God? And how can I look at something that happened to me before in recovery and use that to encourage myself? For example, I didn't know I wasn't going to make it to my first meeting. I think I might fall asleep behind the wheel, right? But that didn't happen. So can I use that to encourage me to believe for something else? And I literally took tiny baby steps like that. And that's what has helped me. And, staying in the light, doing service. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be of service to this group.
Thank you, Rina. Good job.